So, can atheists be moral? Well, I guess the first question is, what do you mean by moral?
Sure. Let me give a little bit of background to this, and then I'll also want to add something to it. I've been grappling with this question pretty much ever since I graduated from college about a year and a half ago. I guess what I mean by moral is that I've been an atheist pretty much my entire life. But as I said, I'm also a conservative, and I cannot agree with leftist morality. They tell me, leftists, libertarians, atheists, they say that morality is ambiguous. Morality is relative. It's Western culture is really no better than anyone else's culture. It's okay that women in the Middle East, they wear burqas because they want to. That's part of that's part of
yeah, and the people who say that, we should totally turn back the migrants, right? Because they think that this culture is better, but it's not. So they're risking life and limb to cross the Mediterranean. They're coming across in leaky boats. They're drowning, some of them. They should be turned back because they're wrong. They think they want to come to Europe because Europe has wealth and goodies and whatever it is that they want, but they're totally wrong.
Right.
Anyone ever make that argument?
No, exactly right. I actually posed this question, and I guess when I say morality, I mean, is there something at our core, something that, I don't know, maybe we're born with, something that
Nope.
that doesn't just pop into our head, that tells us what is right? I posed this question actually to Andrew Klavan on his show with the Daily Wire. And for those who may not know, he's an author.
Does he do a show?
Yeah, he does do a show.
I mean, I know he does. Does he call in show?
He doesn't have a call in show. He's got a mailbag, so you can write in a question and he do it. He's with the Daily Wire. He works with Ben Shapiro.
No, I know him. I have always admired his hairstyle. But,
right.
Right. Right.
Anyways, his answer to this, he more or less focused on just the first part of the question, which was, can atheists be moral? And his answer was fairly eloquent. I'm going to paraphrase it, but essentially what he said was that, of course, atheists can be moral. You can be moral if you're acting upon the values that you discover as a non-atheist. Essentially, he says that Christians and other religious people, they don't act morally or seek out morality because they think it'll get them into heaven. They feel like they have to do it. They do it because they want to, because it makes them happy, because it's the natural state of their soul. So he says that religious people, non-religious people, their souls turn towards God, this moral arbiter, the way that a compass turns the true north.
If only religious people knew, or political people knew, an analogy is not an argument. But anyway, go on.
Right, exactly. And so essentially what he's saying is that there's a moral arbiter that and you're gravitated towards it because that's just the natural state of your soul. And I thought that was eloquent. I really appreciated the answer. I mean, that's all fine and good, but that really does me no good. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. And what I want to do is assert some sense of moral certitude. Just say, no, incest is morally wrong. Pedophilia is morally wrong. There's absolutely no defense of that. Absolutely not. Without appealing to a higher power.
Well, let's start with something that's slightly less challenging.
Okay.
As far as rape, theft, assault, and murder, right? I mean, I've got a whole book on this, so I won't go into too much detail. Called "Universally Preferable Behavior: A Rational Proof of Secular Ethics," which I still think is some of the greatest stuff I've ever done, and I've done some great stuff, let me tell you. And I don't think the argument can be made that our souls sort of naturally incline towards virtue. It's like saying that our bellies naturally gravitate towards vegetables. If it did, we wouldn't need nutritionists. If our souls naturally gravitated towards virtue, then there wouldn't be so many evil people in the world.
Right.
And there are a lot of evil people in the world. And there are a lot of people who do wrong because of ignorance. And as the old Socratic argument goes, if you give them better knowledge, they will make better decisions. And there are those people as well. But there are a lot of just outright evil people in the world. And it comes back to, if you're not religious, and I'm not religious, although I do have a significant amount of respect for Christians these days. because they're so annoyingly, persistently positive and friendly and loving. And, I can't ignore that. I mean, that's a very real and rational factor for me to take into account. And I appreciate, people say, God bless you. And I'm like, you know what? Thank you. That is a lovely sentiment.
Right.
I really, really appreciate that.
I've had a similar experience with it.
But when you don't have the religious side of things, you have to look for other things as to why people do what they do. And, I won't repeat my speech much from earlier in the show, but people do what they do because of evolution. And chocolate tastes good on the tongue is not so great for your body in excess. And using force or fraud, particularly indirectly, is really, really great for getting resources, right? I mean, if, the old thing, it's really hard to go hunt a deer. You got to stalk the damn thing and hit it with an arrow or whatever. And then you got to carry it all the way, bleed it out and carry it back home and cut it all up. It's a lot of work, right? But if you can just steal something from the barbecue, you've just saved yourself a huge amount of time. And this is all over the place in the animal kingdom, right? Is animals stealing each other's food. I mean, cuckoos will even lay their eggs in other birds' nests to have them raise them, right?
Right.
And or cuckoos, or as people on the far right call them, cucks. Anyway, but so stealing and misdirection and fraud and all of these things are all over the place in the animal kingdom, right? I mean, you have particular butterflies that look like poisonous butterflies. You have particular frogs that try and imitate poison frogs without all the expense of producing poison. And, it's all kinds of deception and fraud and force and theft and, every violation of every commandment that you can imagine. I'm sure there's some salamander out there that covets his neighbor's ass too. So it's all over the place in the animal kingdom, and we're sophisticated animals. And so it is a perfectly valid evolutionary strategy to use force or fraud to get resources. And that's why it's so prevalent. And now it's tough because it's limited by retaliation. Right, so if I go steal my neighbor's food, then they could probably figure it out. Right, maybe I left some footprints, maybe they saw me or whatever, and then they can come over and beat me up or steal the stuff back. So, whereas if I cooperate with my neighbor and we help each other with our harvests and our food, whatever. I mean, it's just generally better to cooperate than to steal. So, theft in human societies is limited by effort and risk and fear of retaliation and so on. And lack of cooperation from other people in the tribe, right? Because there's a general fairness matrix or fairness algorithm that goes, which is like, I'm not going to treat you much better than you treat me. Now, again, I know for some Christians, they go less for an eye, and more for, if your enemy asks you to walk a mile, walk 2 miles, and so on. But there is the fear of retaliation. Now, when the state comes in and the state will take on your behalf and give to you, then there's no fear of retaliation. None. And like for women in particular, it's kind of tough. This is from New Zealand studies, but and this is quoted by, I think, Black Pigeon Speaks is the name of the channel. But he was talking about how in New Zealand a study was done that women get $155,000 a year more out of the tax system than they pay in over their lifetime. They get $155,000 more out of their lifetime than they pay in, and most taxes are paid by men, and most of the withdrawals are made by women. Women, it takes until their early 40s for women to start being net positive contributors to the tax system, and then they taper out in their mid 50s. So it's not really very long. But men start being net contributors to the tax system in their early 20s, right? So men pay a lot into the tax system in general, and women withdraw a lot from the tax system. Now, for a woman to go around stealing $155,000 in the course of her life would be rather tricky because, they're somewhat delicate creatures and, somewhat risk-averse when it comes to physical confrontation. And so women ain't going to be stealing $155,000. On the other hand, if the government does it for them, there's no risk whatsoever. It's all reward and no risk. And so when you have the natural human impulse to get something for nothing, and you combine that with the power of the state, which completely removes the risk of transferring wealth from other people to yourself, well, you have a situation where this kind of theft is just going to metastasize and is going to be justified and is going to be perfectly legal because the government always has to provide the illusion that it's adding value. And the way that it does that is taking some of your money, using it as collateral to borrow a whole lot more, and pumping the excess back into the economy and calling itself a net contributor. And it buys votes this way, and this is why it doesn't ever want to restrain its spending, because it's a net drain on society, pretending to be something that is adding to society, but you can only do so through money printing and bonds and leverage and debt and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think that human beings naturally gravitate towards morality. I think that human beings naturally gravitate towards survival and the acquisition of resources and the expenditure of resources, particularly in the production of children, because evolution says that that's what's going to be the big primary determinant for the success or failure of certain gene sets or certain individual genes, I guess you could say. And so human beings gravitate towards survival, as all living organisms do. And when you set up particular incentives, then human beings will gravitate towards those incentives. And there will, of course, be a few exceptions. There will be, people who don't take old age benefits because they consider it wrong and so on. But most people will be like, yeah, I paid into it, or I've been a taxpayer, I owed the money back, or whatever it was. So human beings gravitate towards survival. The state changes incentives to the point where human beings can take goods and services without risk, and therefore that is going to extrapolate. And we can see this happening, right? It's right after the welfare state went in, people started working less and having more kids, and marriages in minority communities in particular dissolved, although white communities and eventually Asian communities aren't that far behind. And people, when the incentives changed, people's behavior changed. And so I think that is the case. I do think, though, that particularly Western people, and I say this not because I'm not really an expert on other cultures in particular, but I think white Western Europeans, maybe a little bit more on the Protestant side, have either a culture or physical brains or whatever it is, maybe it's genetics, uniquely with a unique predilection or preference for universalization. And so I think to be a hypocrite for a European is an uncomfortable thing to be, an uncomfortable place to be emotionally. It's like a splinter in the mind's eye. And other cultures don't seem to have as much problem with corruption and hypocrisy, but WASP cultures in general have a problem with corruption and hypocrisy, and for reasons that we've talked about winter, and we've talked about this before, need for cooperation. And you have a high capacity to punish people socially if you have winter because people can't survive on their own. And so I think that there are certain groups or certain cultures wherein, since God is consistency with these moral commandments, there are certain cultures where inconsistency in the realm of ethics produces acute discomfort, which is called the conscience, and therefore people are more likely to gravitate towards that. I must say I don't find that a universal phenomenon at all. That's my thoughts on that. I'm certainly happy to turn it back to you.
Sure. I guess that absolutely makes sense. Well, I guess one of the things that I always felt was maybe where we get this sense of right and wrong is an evolutionary thing, like you said, it's biological. And absolutely we gravitate towards survival. That's the instinct. That's the natural state of things. That being said, and I guess I also understand that we would develop a code of ethics, essentially, that we have large numbers of people, we have a society that we're trying to maintain where the most people live and the most people are interacting with one another, and to where everybody, I guess not everybody, but to where people are having interactions with one another where we're not stealing, we're not killing, we're not raping, and these kinds of things. We develop ethics, but I guess why I've been having trouble with this is I guess I just wonder where do we get this sense of morality from? How do we develop these Judeo-Christian values, which some of which we've abandoned, but these sort of core tenets of morality that we have, where do we get it from if we're all just sort of naturally inclined for survival?
Well, do you find that they get it in say, Africa?
I guess I haven't really thought of that. I would assume so.
I would not assume so. If you look at the corruption level, if you look at the amount of totalitarianism, if you look at the injustices, if you look at the brutality, if you look at the civil wars, if you look at the child soldiers, I would say that Africa has some moral challenges. It's not solely to Africa, but in other areas as well. But I don't know that it's a universal thing. Now, of course, we've talked about this before, that the average IQ in sub-Saharan Africa is 70.
Right.
Right? So, and according to Helmuth Nyborg, a researcher who's been on this show, and you can look for his NYBORG on the channel at youtube.com/freedomainradio, he says you need at least an IQ of 90 to have basically a democracy or a basic civilization that we would understand in the West. So it's impossible. I mean, the standard answer to why Africa is such a mess is Hillary Clinton. Actually, that's a fair answer. Sadly, that's a fair answer. But the other thing is Western imperialism and racism and legacy of whatever, right? And those things are factors. But there is also, of course, it's sub-Saharan Africa. There is the average IQ of 70. And, whether that's genetic or cultural, it's still 70. Whether you could have been 6 foot tall, but you're 5 foot tall because you didn't get enough food rather than it's genetic, well, you're still not going to grow past 5 foot. Right? So the genetics, I'd love to have the question answered, but unfortunately people won't search for those answers because it's too politically incorrect, and apparently people would rather, destroy everything than face some basic facts about human biodiversity. But so you have to sort of say, if there's these particular cultures or regions or cultures or ethnicities or races where a sensitive conscience appears to be front and center, unless you're willing to sort of abandon a lot of the research that's out there, then you do have to say, it's not universal to all people because different races have different characteristics. In which case, if it's more particular in certain areas, right, sort of white Western Europeans, and now, of course, there is Japan and there's Singapore, there's South Korea and so on, other places which have developed high degrees of pretty wonderfully civilized behavior in many ways, then, it's not looking at IQ or it's a culture and whatever it is. But it's certainly not universal across the world for there to be these kinds of sensitive conscience in the population. In which case, so if you're going to start to say, it's different among ethnicities, then you have to start to look at evolution. And if you start to look at evolution, then you can't sort of say, there's some sort of universal thing that we're drawn towards. Again, I don't have any huge final answers, and I don't think they're already out there, but these are sort of considerations in my approach to this question.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. I guess where I really get stuck here is like, why do we consider taboos to be taboo? Where do we get that from?
Incest is clear. Incest is incest from a biological standpoint is pretty clear. That cousin marriage strips 10 to 16 IQ points off the general population.
Right. It kind of narrows the gene pool. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it produces a significantly increased birth defects and mental retardation. And I mean, it is not good. It's not a good breeding tactic. If you looked at human beings as livestock, you'd view that as not a good breeding tactic.
Right.
So those cultures which would have some coincidental ban on cousin marriage. And those things could come about any number of ways, right? Maybe the king had a hot cousin he didn't want to get married. Someone else to get married to her. I don't know, whatever it is, right? So a culture that would put a ban on cousin marriage would quickly find that the intelligence and able-bodiedness and so on of its members would rise considerably. I mean, if in a couple of generations or more, you could get a 10 to 16 point IQ bump and, vastly reduce the amount of birth defects and so on, well, you as a tribe would do a hell of a lot better. You'd be able to withstand attack. You'd be able to expand. You'd be able to hunt better. It would be a virtuous cycle of continual improvement. So as far as incest goes, I can see quite easily how evolution would put pressure on to ban those things.
I saw a story recently that you had a mother and a son, both of legal age, are having consensual sex, and I see this story, and you're right, the son and the mother, they say, well, people just don't understand.
I would say that's consensual myself. I mean, but that's a topic for another time. I mean, the mother relationship is so powerful that it's hard to say that it's, feminists will say that the boss can't date the secretary because the secretary, it's not consensual, right? Because he's got too much power over her. Well, the person who gave you anyway. But anyway, go on.
So I guess my problem though is that the minute I hear that I was actually doing something else and just heard it in the background, immediately turn and goes, no, that's heinous. That's wrong.
Sure.
And that's why I guess I asked the question. So why do I feel that way as an atheist? If I don't believe that there's a moral arbiter, if I don't believe that, but I have that gut feeling,
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a number of, you could say it's heinous because if it were more universally practiced, civilization would destroy itself. Because we would have so much inbreeding that we would not have the intellectual capacity to defer gratification, to defend abstract principles like separation of church and state, like freedom of speech and other things. We wouldn't be able to enter into lengthy contracts. We wouldn't have any impulse control. Level of criminality goes up enormously when IQ shrinks, right? The sweet spot for criminality is IQ 85. And so if there was a lot of, you may sort of get a sense that if this practice were continued, or if this practice became widespread, I mean, we'd be spiraling back to the Stone Age in a couple of generations. I mean, everything that we've got that is beautiful and great and wonderful and, would be destroyed.
So it's essentially, I guess, a biological protective measure to ensure, I guess, the maintenance of your tribe.
Well, yes, and another way you could put it is atheists. As an atheist, you're smarter than your average bear. And your intelligence genes, the genes for your intelligence, are an animal like any other. And it recognizes a competitor when it sees it. So if the tribe turns dumb, you won't want to have children. Because you couldn't stand being shackled for 20 years with some mouth-breathing, one-toothed, dullard woman. So if the genes for less intelligence spread, the genes for more intelligence are directly threatened because they will die out. Now, the genes for less intelligence view the genes for more intelligence as a threat because they don't interbreed. You don't generally find really smart men with really dumb women or vice versa. So they are two different species, I would argue, and a species in competition. Technically, they'd be called a subspecies, right? Like biologically, subspecies, they don't inhabit the same, like red squirrels and gray squirrels and black squirrels, they don't all inhabit the same area getting along. Like one of them wins, the other one gets pushed out or it goes extinct. Because they're all competing for the same resources. So in human society, the dumb genes are in direct competition. It's a win-lose situation with the smart genes. So when you see breeding patterns that bring your major predatory competitor right into your tribe, i.e. incest, you're like, oh.
Right.
Because when the tribe gets dumb people don't want smart people around because the smart people won't breed with them. Dumb people need to breed more dumb people so that they'll have someone to breed. Their kids will have someone to breed with. The genes don't pass on. If you're the only dumb person around, nobody's going to breed with you. So this is what I mean. Like, it's a win-lose proposition. This is kind of what I'm trying to get across throughout Western civilization as a whole. It's a win-lose proposition. You get the dumb people breeding like crazy or coming in like crazy, they're going to push out and conquer and dominate and subjugate the smart people.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's win-lose for those gene sets. They are predator and prey.
Okay.
In my opinion. Right, it's just an argument. I'm not a biologist, I'm not an anthropologist, but this is sort of how things make a certain kind of sense to me.
Sure, and I guess simply by posing that and saying that, look, I think incest is wrong, that it's self-evident that I have a certain set of core values that are healthy. I suppose so. It's for society, for my community. So obviously atheists can be moral then. So that leads me on to another question, and this one maybe we can frame more historically. When we have societies that turn away from God, that say that become either completely atheistic, they get rid of the church, the state religion essentially is atheism, right? Like the Soviet Union, or just what's more important is the individual, what's more important is the mob, like the French Revolution. How do we when our society turns atheist, somehow we end up there, and we end up with mass genocide. We end up with horrible immorality and just degradation. It's degrading society. We're cutting people's heads off. There's no law and order. It's I feel like I don't know how we get around that. One of my favorite.
Oh, but
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
the problem there. Sorry, the problem is there's not with atheism, in my opinion.
Okay.
The problem is with nihilism.
Okay.
I'm not saying all atheists are nihilists, but what I'm saying is that when you become an atheist, generally it's a letting go of a particular moral structure, and it's letting go of a belief in transcendence, of a belief that you're part of a larger story, a larger picture, and it's the end of a belief in commitment to a larger moral goal, a larger social goal. I mean, there's this general lefty, let's take care of everyone kind of crap that I've talked about in this show before, which again is common but not exclusive to all atheists. But I sort of, like I look at Europe and I look at the people coming into Europe from the Middle East. And the Europeans, kind of hedonistic, they don't really believe in much. And I don't think they fundamentally understand people who have a larger-than-life mission. Because how long has it been since Europeans have had a larger-than-life mission? Certainly a couple of generations.
Definitely.
And for the women, it's been longer than that, or the men sort of in the war. Second World War, 70-plus years, right? So I don't think that Europeans who are so significantly secular, I don't think they understand or remember or can comprehend or conceive of what it's like to have an eschatological, larger-than-life, end-of-the-world mission. I mean, Europeans in the 19th century had a mission to spread European civilization around the world and became imperialists. And part of it was profit and part of it was exploitation, but part of it was also the white man's burden to bring civilization to the corners of the earth, right? That was a larger-than-life mission that Europeans had, for better or for worse. And I got the truth about colonialism and imperialism. It's on the channel. But how long has it been? 150 years? I'm not talking about surviving Nazism. That was like a cornered rat situation. It was not a big, larger-than-life mission. But Europeans, it's been like 150 years or more since Europeans had a world calling. And the last group of Europeans that had that Hegelian spirit of, the world spirit chooses particular nations to act out its divine will from time to time. Hey, Germany, would you like to give it a go? I mean, it's been a long time. And my problem with atheism, the Christians have a larger-than-life, bigger-than-themselves, giant world mission. Bring people to Christ, bring Christianity to the four corners of the earth, attain heaven, defend civilization, defend Christianity, and so on, right? And atheists, as people point out, calling atheism as belief is like calling bald a hair color, right? It is a nihilism insofar as a rejection of belief, and what takes its place? This vaguely lefty multiculturalism, PC correct bullshit, that's going to stand up against nothing in this world. That is, not only is it not going to stand up against anything, it invites in things that are not particularly great. And so, to me, it's not, why atheism spreads and things get worse. Because atheism, okay, let's say we take down the church, and people say, oh, we took down the church, done and dusted, off we go. No. What are you going to build? Took down the church. What are you going to build? Now, I think we should build philosophy when we don't have a church. But as we heard from our Swedish friend, basically shallow, retarded hedonism seems to be most people's answer, and that will fail. Will fail horrendously. So what do you build? Atheists will often turn to the state, right? Raise the church, R-A-Z-E. That's a terrible way of putting it because it sounds like R-A-I-S-E. Tear down the church, build up the legislature. But that's worse than religion. religion is voluntary. The state is not, at least in the West. So I would look at how many atheists you know who have a big giant mission that they're willing to go to the wall for, intellectually, that they're willing to sacrifice for, that they're willing to suffer calumny and insults for, that they're willing to be slandered for. How many people have that giant mission that they're willing to take metaphorical bullets for? I don't meet a lot of atheists who have that.
Me neither. Many of the atheists that I know, that I knew in college or that I followed, if they do have that goal, that target, it's taking down the church. However, I came to a much different conclusion. I don't see the church as dangerous. Actually, my favorite book, nonfiction, is actually Robert Nisbet's Quest for Community. What was so critical about this book? It completely shook my foundation and sort of redefined my conservative ideology. Was essentially, it became clear to me that what the church does is creates at the local level a community center, just a place where people can go, a place where people know each other, where they share the same values, where they do things for their community. Maybe it's charity, maybe it's just fun. It's whatever, and it's very positive, and it's completely and utterly separate from the state. 100%. And it gets kind of at this, like Alexis de Tocqueville talked about soft despotism, is that it's not going to be some Hitler-esque dictator who's gonna come up and say, I'm going to take away your rights. And we're going to, you are going to be oppressed now. It's going to be very slow. It's going to be, we're going to give up more and more and more of our rights for these little comforts, for these little, the state will take care of that. The state will take care of that. We move away from those little things that connect neighbors to each other, like the church. And what is there left when you get rid of all that to connect you? It's just the state. It's just your government. And you end up with a despot who has all this power, who you have no idea how he got all that power. It just, because it was so slow. And sort of Nisbet suggested that the way to avoid that was to endorse the church, or at least your local church, essentially. And I guess what I've been grappling with is, okay, how do we achieve that and not be religious?
Well, I mean, atheists have to stop turning away from the church and towards the state. If the only thing you have to substitute the church for is the state, stay with the church. But if atheists are more dangerous than religious people if they're statists, and most of them are. I've done the whole presentation on this, so I won't get into the details, but many, many times more. And I'm not even talking anarchists. I mean, like, compared to libertarian, I mean, overwhelmingly lefty, right? I mean, atheism, modern atheism, kind of jetted straight out of a lot of communism and state worship and totalitarian worship, and they recognized they recognized the church as an enemy that needed to be destroyed in order to make way for the all-powerful state. And the Christian church's focus on individualism, as opposed to the collectivism of the socialists and the communists, was an impediment, right? So I mean, we just have to, as I do, keep hammering atheists and say, you have traded a less dangerous religion for the most dangerous superstition of the state. You have not made progress. You are retrogressive. You are not scientists. You are cultists of state power. You are not advancing society by destroying the church and raising the state in its place. You are turning us back to a time where primitive force ruled human relations. At least the church generally tends to convert by... The Christian church generally has a preference for spreading by the word, not the sword. But the state only spreads by the sword. There's no other possibility, because it is not an agency of convincing, it's an agency of coercion. It's not an agency of facts, it's an agency of force. It's not an agency of debate, it's an agency of violence. And getting atheists to understand that fleeing from the church to the state is falling backwards in time and is exchanging a voluntary God for an involuntary dictator is really hard, because atheists are kind of a philosophically pig-ignorant and arrogant lot in general. And I say this with, as an atheist, and I say this having had many, many years interaction with atheists. They are ungodly, unbearable know-it-alls a lot of the time. And when I've tried to talk to atheists about this, I have had way more positive conversations talking to Christians about atheism than talking to atheists about statism, or talking to Christians about anarchism than talking to atheists about statism. They don't know the damage they're doing. And what's worse is they don't even want to know when you tell them. See, they say God doesn't exist. I say the state doesn't exist. They say God is just a belief in people's minds. I say the state is just a belief in people's minds. And they say, well, sure, the state exists. Look, here's a picture of a capital. And I say, well, are you saying that God exists because I show you a picture of the Vatican? They can't do it. It's so obvious. But they can't, they literally, physically, it feels like they can't do it. And that is deeply disturbed. When you can't understand a parallel, clear argument, when you can't understand that all of the arguments you apply against God apply even more so about the state, you have a serious wiring problem in your head. What's that line from Full Metal Jacket? What is your major malfunction, son? What is their major malfunction? The state is far more dangerous a belief set than religion is, at least it's a tamed Christianity in the West. And it's such a parallel system. It's literally like one twin looking at another twin and saying, guy looks nothing like me. How could you insinuate that? It's ridiculous, highly offensive. He's ugly and I'm beautiful. You're twins. You look exactly this. No! Right? I mean, that would just be the mark of a seriously disturbed human being.
Is there a way to break atheists of that? My senior year of college, I read Alan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind? I believe so.
Closing of the American Mind.
Yes, yeah. And essentially,
where he described Ayn Rand's sub-Nietzschean assertiveness. I've always liked that phrase. But anyway, go on.
Right, and in one of those chapters, he talked about that he enjoyed. He got so much more out of teaching students who showed up to day one of class, having a deep knowledge of the Bible, of having grown up in Sunday school, of having the parents really, really teach it to them. And they come to class, they come to school with these deep-seated values. And he said that those were the people that he really liked to teach. It wasn't these people who came in with these sort of amorphous, morality is ambiguous, I'm open to anything. Those people, he felt like he couldn't teach them anything. They couldn't learn. Right. But it was the students with those deep-seated moral values that he felt could really learn. And I guess without that, without religion, without that need to say, well, I've got to bring this to my kids because I want them to go to heaven, because I want them to be there in the afterlife. I'm obligated to bring that to them. When we're atheists and we don't have that obligation, how do we give them that value that they can then take on to college?
Well, you have to do it philosophically. Yeah, you have to. I mean, if you're going to abandon religion, you can't say, well, we're good because we obey the state. I mean, that's oh my God, it's a complete disaster.
Right.
So you can't say we're good because we obey the state. So you can't use the state. You can't use God. You have to use philosophy, or just raise them as out and out radical and skeptical nihilists, which is also a complete disaster. And you can't survive that way. So it's philosophy or bust, right? I mean, you can't convince atheists to go back to religion, obviously, right? But I know some do. I know some do. C.S. Lewis, right? But the majority of atheists, you can't convince them to go back to religion. There's no unringing that bell. So atheists kind of stuck between religion and philosophy. They're stuck in their self-destructive hell of statism. So you got to, sorry, your trip ain't done yet, boys and girls. Come on, everybody, grab the rope. Hold on to it together. We're going out into the storm, and we're getting to philosophy. We're getting to voluntarism. We're getting to the non-aggression principle. We're getting to UPB. You ain't done yet. It's easy pickings, and I've done this myself. I'm not above it. I mean, easy pickings to pick apart the inconsistencies of religion.
Right.
It's not an intellectual triumph to be able to disprove the existence of God. It's not. It's not an intellectual triumph to point out that there are inconsistencies in the Bible. That back 40 has already been hoed quite a few times.
Definitely.
So it is a significant intellectual triumph to come up with a system of ethics that withstands rational scrutiny and doesn't rely on gods or governments.
Do we get that from...
or some innate soul or some innate conscience or whatever it is, right? Which is my book, Universally Preferable Behavior. So just reminding atheists that you can sit in the squalor and self-satisfaction of having pushed over a house of cards, but let's go build something real.
Sure. Okay.
But to do that, you have to piss them off.
Right.
You do, right? Because they've been picking fights with Girl Scouts, right? They've been picking apart the irrationalities of religion, which is not a huge feat to do. I say this, I mean, I've done it, and I mean, I'm not saying I'm not proud of it, but it was not that tough. Yeah, you have to annoy them. You have to annoy them and say, this negation of the spiritual, it's fine. Now what? And now what cannot be the state, because that's a way worse religion than the one you have trashed.
Sure. Let me ask you one more question.
Okay, last question, man. It's been a 4-hour show, so not your fault. But last question, I gotta get myself some downtime.
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to say this first, and then I'm going to add a caveat to it. Is Donald Trump, is he the moral choice in this circumstance? And the caveat is, I don't say that to mean that Hillary.
No. There's the choices. Okay, let's say that you're an athlete and you've really hurt your knee. By the way, Roseanne, sorry to hear about your knee. Thank you for retweeting me. But if you're an athlete and you crack your knee something fierce, does going to the surgeon make you a better athlete?
Well, yes. Because if you ignore the problem, right, it's just going to get worse, and then you're going to blow out.
No, you can't even walk on it, right?
Can't even walk
let's just say you really. I mean, you're like, your kneecap has floated around somewhere to your armpit. I don't know, some damn thing, right? Like you can't walk. Does going to the surgeon make you a better athlete?
Well, I would think so, because you get to, if you don't go to the surgeon, you're not going to play another day.
Going to the surgeon does not make you a better athlete. Going to the surgeon makes it possible for you to become a better athlete in the future. There's a difference, right?
Right.
You can go to the surgeon and retire. It doesn't make you a better athlete, but it makes it possible for you to be a better athlete in the future. The surgeon is not the same as the elite coach. Because the elite coach, you go and say, my kneecap is in my armpit, he'll say, go to the doctor. Can't help you. Now, when you're better and you're rehabbed and you're physioed, and come on back, right? So, to me, Donald Trump is that which allows the conversation called Western civilization to continue. He's like the surgeon. You have to go to the surgeon in order to have a potential career as an athlete in the future. And you have to restrict immigration from third world countries. You have to simplify the tax code. You have to try and lower taxes. You have to try and get people to stop being as dependent on the state. You have to find some way for America to stop being ripped off by all these foreign trade deals. You have to find some way to reduce the price of healthcare. And he's got solid ideas for all of these things. And he's not owned by Washington. So when you ask, is he the moral choice? To me, that's a confusion between the doctor and the coach. I'm the coach. He's the doctor. And the West has broken its knees to shit. Now they got to go to the doctor, and if they go to the doctor and it works, then we can continue their training as an athlete. So you're saying, is Donald Trump a good coach? I don't think so. But I'm not a good doctor. But the doctor is necessary for the coaching to continue. All right?
I had never thought of it like that.
All right. Well, thanks everyone so much for your time and your attention. A wonderful show. And sorry for those of you who just love watching me drink my coffee while I'm doing my show. But I had a bit of a sitting kind of day, doing a bunch of shows, and a standing day doing the shows, preparing for shows and doing the shows. So I wanted to stroll around a little bit, and that's nice for me. Thanks, everyone. A wonderful, wonderful set of conversations. Thanks to all the callers. Thanks to you out there listening in the world. Whatever you're doing, please remember to go to freedomainradio.com/donate to help out the show. We need your support. We need your help to do what is necessary to save the world. If you can find a better cause, please support them. I think we're the best around, the greatest hope that we've got. freedomainradio.com/donate. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Stefan Molyneux and use our affiliate link, ftrurl.com/Amazon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. So, can atheists be moral? Well, I guess the first question is, what do you mean by moral?
Sure. Let me give a little bit of background to this, and then I'll also want to add something to it. I've been grappling with this question pretty much ever since I graduated from college about a year and a half ago. I guess what I mean by moral is that I've been an atheist pretty much my entire life. But as I said, I'm also a conservative, and I cannot agree with leftist morality. They tell me, leftists, libertarians, atheists, they say that morality is ambiguous. Morality is relative. It's Western culture is really no better than anyone else's culture. It's okay that women in the Middle East, they wear burqas because they want to. That's part of that's. Yeah. I posed this question actually to Andrew Klavan on his show with the Daily Wire. And for those who may not know, he's an author.
Does he do a show?
Yeah, he does do a show.
I mean, I know he does. Does he call in show?
He doesn't have a call in show. He's got a mailbag, so you can write in a question and he do it. He's with the Daily Wire. He works with Ben Shapiro.
No, I know him. I've always admired his hairstyle. But,
right.
Right. Right.
Anyways, his answer to this, he more or less focused on just the first part of the question, which was, can atheists be moral? And his answer was fairly eloquent. I'm going to paraphrase it, but essentially what he said was that, of course, atheists can be moral. You can be moral if you're acting upon the values that you discover as a non-atheist. Essentially, he says that Christians and other religious people, they don't act morally or seek out morality because they think it'll get them into heaven. They feel like they have to do it. They do it because they want to, because it makes them happy, because it's the natural state of their.
And the people who say that, we should totally turn back the migrants, right? Because they think that this culture is better, but it's not. So they're risking life and limb to cross the Mediterranean. They're coming across in leaky boats. They're drowning, some of them. They should be turned back because they're wrong. They think they want to come to Europe because Europe has wealth and goodies and whatever it is that they want, but they're totally wrong.
Right.
Anyone ever make that argument?
No, exactly right. I actually posed this question, and I guess when I say morality, I mean, is there something at our core, something that, I don't know, maybe we're born with, something that
Nope.
That doesn't just pop into our head, that tells us what is right. I put soul. So he says that religious people, non-religious people, their souls turn towards God, this moral arbiter, the way that a compass turns the true north.
If only religious people knew, or political people knew, an analogy is not an argument. But anyway, go on.
Right, exactly. And so essentially what he's saying is that there's a moral arbiter and you're gravitated towards it because that's just the natural state of your soul. And I thought that was eloquent. I really appreciated the answer. I mean, that's all fine and good, but that really does me no good. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. And what I want to do is assert some sense of moral certitude. Just say, no, incest is morally wrong. Pedophilia is morally wrong. There's absolutely no defense of that. Absolutely not. Without appealing to a higher power.
Well, let's start with something that's slightly less challenging.
Okay.
As far as rape, theft, assault, and murder, right? I mean, I've got a whole book on this, so I won't go into too much detail, called Universally Preferable Behavior, A Rational Proof of Secular Ethics, which I still think is some of the greatest stuff I've ever done. And I've done some great stuff, let me tell you. And I don't think the argument can be made that our souls sort of naturally incline towards virtue. It's like saying that our bellies naturally gravitate towards vegetables. If it did, we wouldn't need nutritionists. If our souls naturally gravitated towards virtue, then there wouldn't be so many evil people in the world.
Right.